It started with a flat tire, a broken-down car on a sun-scorched Arizona highway. She was a fallen millionaire cast out by her own boardroom, stranded in more ways than one. He was a quiet 20-year-old covered in dust, carrying nothing but a toolkit and dignity. In a world divided by wealth, expectation, and silence, one small act of kindness sparked a chain of events that neither of them saw coming. This is not just a story of love. It's a story of what happens when two broken paths cross, and instead of running away, they stop and build something. The world forgot how to believe in purpose, respect, a future. This is the story of Malik and Arielle, and how in the middle of nowhere, they built everything. Under the searing Arizona sun, the air shimmered above the cracked two-lane highway that stretched endlessly through the desert, carving its way between red rock formations and brittle sagebrush. Dust swirled lazily around the worn tires of a gleaming white Tesla, parked crookedly on the gravel shoulder, its rear tire shredded beyond recognition, rubber flapping like torn cloth in the wind. Arielle Monroe stood beside the vehicle, one hand shading her eyes, the other clenching her phone in frustration. No bars, no signal, no help coming. Her hair was slicked back into a messy bun, designer sunglasses slightly askew her linen blouse clinging to her skin with a sheen of sweat. She had been out there for nearly an hour cursing herself, cursing the tire, cursing the fact that she had taken this detour at all. Somewhere behind her, the distant hum of an approaching engine grew louder. Not a car, but a low rattle, something older, mechanical, persistent. When she turned squinting against the glare, she saw it, an old Ford pickup. Sun-bleached with one headlight yellowed and the other missing its cover, entirely rolling to a slow stop behind her car. The engine cut off, and from the driver's side stepped out a tall, lean young man, skin the color of warm mahogany dark curls, matted to his forehead with sweat, and a quiet confidence in his step that didn't match the dust-covered boots or the frayed hem of his jeans. He was no older than 20, maybe younger, but his movements carried the certainty of someone who had seen enough of life to stop pretending it owed him anything. "You look like you've been fighting that cactus for a while," he said, nodding toward the tire, his voice smooth with a trace of amusement and a lot of warmth. Arielle exhaled, half laughing, half annoyed. "I've been here long enough to regret ever leaving the interstate," she said, brushing dust off her skirt, though it did little good. He stepped closer, his eyes scanning the tire, then the car, then back to her. "Mind if I take a look?" She hesitated, instincts honed from years in a corporate world that didn't reward trust. But then again, she was stranded in the desert with no cell service, and he didn't look like he cared one bit about the emblem on the back of her car or the subtle designer label on her purse. She nodded. He dropped a canvas backpack to the ground and knelt beside the ruined tire. From the bag, he pulled a set of tools that had clearly seen better days, handles worn metal dulled by years of use, but they were arranged with care, wrapped in cloth and tied with twine like heirlooms passed down. "Spare in the trunk?" he asked, already pulling on a pair of gloves. "I think so," she replied, stepping aside as he popped it open and lifted the compartment. She watched him work. He didn't talk much, didn't waste time. Every motion was purposeful, practiced. The jack went under the bolts, came off, and for the first time since she pulled over, Arielle let herself breathe. There was something mesmerizing about the way he moved, fluid, efficient, quiet. The sun gleamed on his forearms as he tightened the last bolt, his brow furrowed in focus. She found herself studying him longer than she meant to, drawn to the calm presence he carried like armor. "Do you do this often?" She asked more to fill the silence than out of necessity. He shrugged, wiping his hands on his jeans as he stood. "My uncle used to run a repair shop in town. Taught me everything before he passed." The finality in his tone made her pause. He looked at her, then not searching, not expecting anything, just meeting her gaze squarely. "You're all set." She reached instinctively for her wallet. "Let me at least—" He raised a hand, already slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "No need, ma'am. I'm just glad I took this road today." Her fingers froze over the leather strap. She wasn't used to refusal, wasn't used to kindness without angle. "You don't want anything?" she asked, genuinely stunned. He shook his head, smiling faintly. "I've got what I need." And just like that, he turned and began walking up the hill, the sun stretching his shadow long and thin across the road. "Wait," she called. "What's your name?" He paused, turned back with a nod. "Malik. Malik Johnson." She offered hers in return more quietly than she expected. "Arielle. Arielle Monroe." He nodded again, gave a small wave, and continued on his way, vanishing over the ridge like a mirage dissolving in heat. That night, back in her family's estate, nestled in the mountains above Sedona, Arielle sat alone on the wraparound balcony, overlooking a canyon of shadows and silence. The glass of wine in her hand had gone warm. Her phone buzzed beside her with unanswered calls. Former colleagues, investors, her assistant all wanting updates or explanations. She no longer had the will to give, but her thoughts drifted not to them, not to the boardroom where she'd been unseated weeks ago, not to the smirks or the handshakes that had cut her down with civility. Her mind kept returning to the boy. No, the young man on the side of the road, the way he'd looked at her. Not as someone to impress, but as someone to help. She didn't even know where he'd gone, or why it mattered so much that he had refused her money. All she knew was that for the first time in a long while, someone had looked at her without calculation or judgment, and it left her shaken in a way no scandal or headline ever had. The next morning, the light came late to Arielle's bedroom, filtered through thick curtains and the haze of a restless night. She hadn't slept much, her thoughts looping in quiet rebellion against everything that used to anchor her. Her title, her board seat, her meticulously curated image. It all felt like fabric unraveling now, each thread loosed by questions she wasn't ready to answer. But one image remained stubbornly clear. Malik Johnson walking up that ridge, tools in hand, the heat of the desert brushing against his shoulders, as if he belonged to it, as if the world didn't owe him anything, and he'd long stopped asking. By noon, she was back in her Tesla, the car now whole, but somehow still silent in the ways that mattered. She wasn't sure where she was going. She only knew that the air in Sedona felt too curated, too sterile. She needed something real. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary as she retraced the route she had taken the day before, eyes darting to every side street and alley, every service station, every rusted mailbox perched precariously on wooden posts. The miles passed slowly, deliberately, until she reached the edge of a town that barely had a name. The kind of place that looked like it had been forgotten by time, where porch swings creaked without rhythm, and window shutters tilted like tired eyelids. Just as she was about to give up, her eyes caught movement, a flash of denim and flannel on the porch of a weather-beaten home. An older woman stood near a screen door, shouting something indistinct toward the roof. Then Arielle saw him. Malik was balanced on a ladder, hammering down warped shingles with the same quiet focus he'd used on her tire. The scene held her motionless, suspended in the stillness of midday. He hadn't seen her yet. Was she really going to approach him again? What did she even plan to say that she couldn't stop thinking about him? That she needed him to explain why his presence had shaken something loose inside her? She stepped out of the car, dust rising around her boots. She hadn't worn heels this time. He glanced down at the noise eyes narrowing slightly in confusion. Then recognition softened his brow. "Miss Monroe?" he said cautiously, climbing down with ease. "Did the tire give out again?" She shook her head, lips twitching, still holding strong. "Then what brings you out here?" "I was in the area." She lied, poorly. He smirked, glancing at the crooked ladder, then at her again. "This area, I never got to say thank you properly." She offered her voice, unsure of its own excuse. Malik shrugged. "You already did." There was no sarcasm in his voice, no pretense. Just a simple truth offered like a cold drink on a hot day. She looked at the ladder, the rusted nails in a half-filled coffee can, the weathered porch that sagged beneath his boots. "Do you do this a lot?" "Sometimes people need help," he said, adjusting the strap on his backpack. "And I like using my hands." The way he said it made her chest tighten. It wasn't just about carpentry. It was about control, about building something when the rest of life refused to cooperate. They stood in silence, the kind that wasn't uncomfortable, but filled with the sound of wind moving through dry trees and distant bird song. She reached into her bag and pulled out a cold bottle of water. "Here." Their fingers brushed as she handed it to him, and this time neither looked away. "Thanks," he said, unscrewing the cap. Do you like coffee?" she asked. It felt ridiculous coming out of her mouth. She had no plan, no pretense, just a sudden desire to sit with this person a little longer. His lips quirked into the first real smile she'd seen. "Depends who's asking. Someone who's not done driving this road yet." That made him laugh, and before either of them could overthink it, they were in her car driving into town toward a diner that looked like it had been plucked out of an old postcard. The sign above the door blinked half its letters, and the screen door creaked loud enough to wake the dead. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fried potatoes, burnt coffee, and long conversations. Locals barely glanced up, save for a waitress who raised an eyebrow at Arielle's polished look. Malik led the way to a booth in the back, sliding in with the ease of someone who had sat here many times before. Arielle followed her movements, more deliberate, unsure. "I don't usually chase down electricians," she said, settling in across from him. "And I don't usually drink coffee with millionaires." He replied, his tone light, but edged with something real. "Former millionaire," she corrected. "Well, maybe just a different kind now." He stirred sugar into his cup slowly. "So, why are you really here?" She looked out the window, gathering words. "I don't know," she said finally. "I was driving and ended up back here. You're not used to being curious without a reason, are you?" She blinked, caught off guard. "I'm not used to someone walking away from me." Malik looked down at his cup. "People like me don't usually get asked to stay." Silence stretched between them, not cold but thick with honesty. "I grew up in a house where nothing stayed fixed," he said finally. "My mom left, my dad drank, my aunt kept us going with duct tape and prayer. So I learned early if it's broken and you can't replace it, you better learn to fix it." "Do you ever ask for help?" she asked gently. "I ask gravity not to kill me when I'm on a roof. That's about it." She laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was true, and he smiled at the sound. "What about you?" he asked. "What brings someone like you to a place like this?" Arielle looked at her hands, then back at him. "I lost something," she said. "Maybe I never really had it. But when I walked out of that boardroom, no one looked me in the eye. They just handed me a check and thanked me for my service like I was being discharged from the military." Malik drummed his fingers on the table. "Sometimes the exit is the best part of the building." She stared at him, then let out a breath that felt like it had been stuck in her chest for years. "You're good with words. I build fences for a living." He shrugged. "Gives you time to think." She reached into her bag again and pulled out a small leather notebook worn at the edges. She slid it across the table to him. "What's this?" he asked. "An idea," she said. "A community space, a workshop, tools, mentorship, maybe even media training. For kids who don't get second chances. But I need someone who actually knows how to build things." He didn't touch the notebook. "You barely know me. I know what you did when no one was watching," she replied. "That's more than I can say for most people I've worked with." He finally picked up the notebook, opened it slowly, his fingers lingering on the pages covered in blue ink and simple sketches. He didn't say anything for a long time. Then he looked at her. Really looked. And for the first time since their encounter on that lonely road, Arielle didn't feel like she was lost. She felt found. Malik didn't respond immediately. He sat in that cracked leather booth, flipping through the notebook, with a quiet care that made time feel suspended, like the air itself was listening. Arielle watched his eyes as they moved across the sketches and scribbled notes lines drawn in moments of hope, in nights when she didn't know if she was crazy or just finally honest. He paused on a page labeled Skill Tree, a web of pathways starting from basic carpentry and video editing, branching out into entrepreneurship and mentorship. He ran his finger lightly across one of the arrows, then closed the book. "I'm not sure I'm the right person for this," he said. His voice wasn't defensive, just uncertain, like someone staring at a mountain he wasn't sure he was allowed to climb. "I'm not sure I am, either," Arielle admitted. There was vulnerability in her tone, raw and without polish. She wasn't pitching this like a presentation. She was offering it like a piece of herself, torn out and handed across formica and coffee steam. "But I know what I felt when you walked away. I know what I felt when no one in my world would meet my eyes after the vote, and you? A stranger looked at me like I wasn't broken." Malik leaned back against the booth, studying her. "What happens if we build it and it doesn't work? Then we'll fix it," she said, without missing a beat. He gave her a look, not mocking, but edged with something deeper. Maybe disbelief. Maybe awe. Maybe fear. Outside, the afternoon sun had begun to sink, turning the cracked sidewalk into a golden mosaic. Malik stood slowly still, holding the notebook. "All right," he said finally. "Let's see where this road goes." The next few days passed in a strange blur of movement and silence. Arielle extended her stay at a motel on the edge of town, the kind of place with broken vending machines and thin towels. It was a far cry from the penthouse she used to inhabit in downtown LA, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't mind the downgrade. Every morning, she met Malik near the site. They had selected a long abandoned warehouse on county land just outside Flagstaff. The roof sagged in places, graffiti lined the rusted doors, and raccoons had clearly claimed one of the back rooms as home. But Malik saw something else. "The bones are good," he said on their first walkthrough. "Better than some people I know." Arielle laughed and he smiled, and so they began. They cleaned, hauled, measured, drew up plans. Malik taught her how to swing a hammer without breaking a wrist, and she taught him how to run a Zoom presentation without breaking into a sweat. They were awkward at first, dancing around each other like strangers still, but each day chipped away at the unfamiliar, replaced it with rhythm, with trust, and slowly something else too. One evening, Arielle stood on a ladder trying to tape up a layout diagram while Malik held the base. "You really think they'll come?" she asked. The kids, the community, Malik looked up at her. "If you build something that's real, people find it, even if they don't know they're looking." Her heart stuttered a little at that, not because of the words, but because he said them like he believed them. Like maybe he'd been found too. 2 nights later, she invited him to a gala. She didn't call it that, not out loud, but that's what it was. A benefit hosted by one of her former colleagues. A soiree meant to bring together potential donors under the guise of jazz canapes and thin smiles. "It could help," she said. "Visibility. Resources." "You sure I fit that kind of room?" he asked, not bitterly, but plainly. "You fit wherever you stand," she replied. But the night didn't go how she planned. Not exactly. The Carrington estate gleamed under chandelier light. Guests flowed like champagne around polished banisters and silver platters. Arielle wore a charcoal dress, elegant and simple. Malik wore a borrowed blazer pressed stiff, his boots scrubbed clean, but still boots. They arrived together, but the room didn't see them the same. A man in his 50s approached, smiling, without warmth. "Arielle, finally. We thought you'd given up on us." His eyes flicked to Malik. "And you've brought a guest." "This is Malik Johnson," she said firmly. "He's helping me build something that matters." The man didn't offer his hand. "Charmed?" he said flatly, then turned away. Malik stepped back instinctively, drifting toward the edges of the party like a shadow that didn't belong in the frame. Arielle tried to stay beside him, but old faces pulled her in. Familiar voices, former friends. She was good at the dance, laughing at the right places, making eye contact just long enough. But tonight, it all felt false. Malik stood near the hors d'oeuvres table, reaching for something with a toothpick, when a man in a crisp blazer sidled up beside him. "You're not from around here, are you?" Malik turned slow and unimpressed. "Excuse me." "Relax." The man chuckled. "Just making conversation. Arielle tends to bring home projects." Malik's jaw tensed. She didn't bring home anything. The man raised a drink, smirking. "Easy. I'm just saying she's got a type. Lost causes, dogs, startups, strays." Malik's hand clenched, but before he could respond, a voice cut through the air like glass. "Is there a problem?" Arielle had arrived. Her smile was tight eyes cold. "No problem," the man muttered, backing off. She turned to Malik. "I'm sorry. He's a jerk." "Yeah," Malik said quietly. "But he's not the only one staring." "They don't matter." "They matter to you," he said. "And I don't." The words struck deep, and Arielle didn't have an answer fast enough. Malik turned and walked through a side door into the night air, leaving behind gold walls and orchestras. She found him on the terrace leaning against a railing, the valley below painted in darkness and flickers of light. "I didn't think it'd be like this," she said. "Didn't think I'd be on display." "I wanted you here," she said softly. "Yeah," he replied. "Or did you just want to feel better about yourself?" That one cut. She looked away. "I'm not angry that you're rich," he said, voice lower now. "I'm angry that you thought bringing me here would make it easier for either of us." "You think I don't see it?" she snapped. "The way they look at me since I left the company, like I'm defective. And maybe I did bring you here hoping they'd see something good in what I found outside their world. Turns out," he said bitterly, "you don't want to be seen either." Silence opened like a canyon between them. Then he added softer, "I've spent most of my life blending in so I wouldn't get hurt." She stepped closer. "I'm not here to hurt you, Malik. Then don't parade me." That landed. Arielle reached for his hand, but he stepped back. "You don't know what it's like walking into a room and waiting to be called the mistake." Her voice cracked. "Maybe not." but I know what it's like to stand in a room and not know who I am anymore." He looked at her again. This time there was pain, but also something more complicated, understanding maybe, or disappointment. "I should go." She nodded. He stepped past her, then paused, not turning. "It wasn't the food," he said. "I came for you." And then he was gone, swallowed by the dark, leaving Arielle alone on the balcony with a glass of untouched champagne and the weight of 1,000 stairs behind her. The sun rose slow and heavy the next morning, bleeding orange light across the motel room's thin curtains as Arielle sat awake on the edge of the bed, still wearing the same gray dress from the night before, now wrinkled and soft at the edges, like a memory already trying to fade. Her shoes lay by the door, abandoned where she had kicked them off in frustration, and her phone was buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. Texts from reporters, polite inquiries from donors, veiled concern from her former colleagues, pretending not to gossip about what had happened on the Carrington Terrace. The internet had already picked it up. Of course, someone had posted a blurred photo of her and Malik stepping into the party together, and now the headlines read things like, "Disgraced creative director reappears with mystery companion," or "Arielle Monroe's new cause from fortune to fixer-uppers." She didn't read the comments. She didn't need to. She'd lived long enough in the public eye to know what they'd say about her and about him. But what haunted her more than the headlines was the way he'd looked at her before he walked away. Not angry, not even disappointed, just hurt in a way that felt too familiar. She had seen that look in her own mirror before, back when she stood in the boardroom with 20 silent men and watched her career be dissected by people who never bothered to ask why she created in the first place. She stood, finally washed the night off her skin, pulled her hair into a braid, and changed into jeans and a cotton shirt, not for anyone else's gaze, but because today she didn't want to wear anything that reminded her of who she used to be. She drove with the windows down, letting the wind punish her a little. Her eyes locked on the road, her mind rehearsing what she'd say if she found him again, though none of it felt right. She didn't want to beg. She didn't want to defend. She just wanted to be understood. The lot behind Thompson Hardware was almost empty save for a stack of lumber and a rusted saw table buzzing quietly under a canvas awning. Malik was there, bent over a workbench sawdust, clinging to his arms, a pencil tucked behind his ear, pretending not to notice her car roll up behind him. She stepped out slowly, no sunglasses this time, no pretense, her boots crunching over gravel as she approached. "You lost again?" he asked, not turning. His voice was dry, flat but not unkind. "I was in the area," she replied weakly. "You rich folks always in the area when you want something." His tone held a faint bite, but it didn't sting like it might have. It felt like a wall being rebuilt, not to keep her out, but to protect what was left. She moved closer, but didn't touch anything. Not the table, not the tools, not even the moment. "I'm not here for a fight." "Good," he muttered. "I'm tired of those." I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," she said, voice steadier than she expected. That got him. He paused mid-measurement, set the pencil down. For what he asked, not looking at her. For thinking I'd enjoy seeing you like that. A curiosity in my world. For putting you in that room in that situation. And for not stopping you when you clearly wanted to leave. He said nothing, just picked up a rag and wiped his hands, his shoulders still. It wasn't about leaving, he said finally. It was about being seen the wrong way. She nodded slowly, her eyes scanning the tools, the open lot, the makeshift shed he'd built with his own hands. "I brought you into my space," she said, "but I never gave you room to breathe." He turned at that. Really turned, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that day. "Why do you care so much?" he asked, her voice cracked just slightly. "Because you're the first person in years who looked at me without expectation or calculation. You just saw me." That silenced him. Not because he didn't believe her, but because maybe he did, and it scared him more than doubt ever could. She reached into her bag and pulled out the same notebook, their notebook now, but it was no longer clean or new. It was worn at the spine, filled with new sketches, real numbers, funding contacts, potential mentors, vocational pathways mapped out in loops and ink. "I kept working on it," she said. "The idea's real now. The money's not the issue anymore. But the heart of it, that's still you." He took it, not flipping through the pages this time, but holding it like it carried weight, not just in paper, but in trust. "You don't have to say yes," she added softer. "But I need you to know I meant every word." He closed the notebook slowly, not speaking for a long beat. Then, with a voice low, but no longer guarded, he asked, "Why me?" She smiled, her eyes tired but lit from within. "Because you don't need to be rich to be extraordinary." And in that second, under the glare of the Arizona sun and the hum of a workbench still spinning in the background, Malik looked at her, not with fear, not with anger, but with something like belief. For the first time since the night on the terrace, he allowed himself to really see her again. Not the headlines, not the heiress, just Arielle. And slowly, deliberately, he nodded. "All right, I'll help you build it," he said, "but on one condition." She tilted her head. "What, you stop apologizing for loving something real?" Her breath caught, then turned into a laugh, relieved, grateful, alive. "Deal," she whispered. And though neither of them said it, they both knew something had shifted. Something had begun, not in headlines or handshakes, but in hammers and notebooks, and the silence between two people who had finally stopped pretending to be anything but true. The following week arrived like a turning page, brisk and determined, the kind of chapter that doesn't ask permission before changing everything. Arielle and Malik found themselves shoulder to shoulder more often than not, drafting floor plans at a diner booth, mapping out budgets on the hood of her car, arguing over the placement of power outlets as the late afternoon sun dipped low behind the sagging warehouse. It wasn't glamorous work. Nothing about scraping graffiti off cement or sweeping rat droppings from rusted corners screamed transformation, but to them, it was sacred. Every nail driven into a cracked beam was a vote of confidence. Every strip of insulation stapled into the bones of the building was a small act of faith. They called it the framework phase, laughing at how their backs hurt more than their feelings for once. Malik took the lead on construction, teaching local teens how to measure, how to brace, how to build without cutting corners. Some of them came with chips on their shoulders like Malik once did. Some were just quiet kids who'd been told too often to stay small. Arielle managed logistics permits, emails, grant writing, phone calls that stretched into the night. But it wasn't the Arielle of corporate meetings and brand launches. She wore work boots now. Her nails were chipped. She drove a pickup they borrowed from a church charity. And she smiled more than anyone had seen in years. The first big challenge arrived one rainy Thursday when the city planner showed up unannounced, clipboard in hand, and skepticism in every syllable. "You're proposing a hybrid vocational and creative development center with mixed-use zoning," he said, eyeing the half-renovated space like it was a contagious disease. "That's not exactly standard for this district." Arielle didn't flinch. "Nothing we're doing is standard," she replied, "but it's legal and it's necessary." Malik stepped in, calm but firm. "This building's been abandoned for 8 years. We're giving it back to the community. Isn't that what revitalization means?" The planner looked between them, scribbled something, and said he'd get back to them. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. Arielle and Malik had learned by now that progress doesn't come with applause. That night they sat in the back of the truck, with plans spread between them, their hands stained with ink and dust, a portable lamp buzzing beside a thermos of coffee. Malik pointed to the electrical diagram she'd sketched. "You drew this circuit backward," he said. She groaned. "Seriously?" "Yep." "Fine, maybe I did," she muttered, dragging her pen across the paper to fix it. He smirked. "You're lucky I'm patient." "I'm lucky for a lot of things lately," she whispered almost to herself. The quiet between them thickened into something solid. She looked up at him, eyes shimmering in the low light. "They're going to come after me again. The board, the press. They think this is a vanity project. They'll say I'm throwing money at a boy I barely know." Malik leaned back, arms crossed. "Let them say it." She looked at him, surprised. "You're not afraid I've been underestimated my whole life," he said. "It doesn't scare me anymore, but it does fuel me." There was pride in his tone, but no arrogance. Just truth. That kind of truth that makes people uncomfortable because it doesn't need to prove itself. Arielle studied his face in the golden halo of the lamp, the set of his jaw, the softness in his eyes when he wasn't defending himself. "You're not the only one who lost something," he added. She turned toward him, drawn in by the shift in his voice. "I lost faith a long time ago," he said. "In people, in fairness, in second chances. But you kept showing up, and that started something." She leaned in. What did it start? He looked at her, then really looked. Hope. The word landed like a heartbeat, not loud, but undeniable. The next morning, they got word that the zoning approval had gone through, conditional but greenlit. Arielle laughed out loud in the parking lot and pulled Malik into a hug without thinking. He stiffened at first, then let himself relax, arms folding around her, with a slowness that said he hadn't held anyone like that in a long time. From that point on, things accelerated. The floorboards went in. The framing took shape. They brought in artists from the community to paint murals on the inside walls, images of hands building children, dreaming elders watching with pride. Donated tools lined the shelves. A media lab took shape in the back, outfitted with second-hand equipment and cameras Arielle had sourced from every forgotten storage closet she could find. But with each win came new battles. Investors who had once courted her sent thinly veiled ultimatums. Disassociate from this project or be blacklisted, one email read. This isn't the Arielle Monroe we backed. She didn't reply. Instead, she wrote a new mission statement on the workshop's homepage. We build more than walls. We build worth. The backlash hit fast. Her social media feeds were flooded with speculation, anonymous comments, half-hearted think pieces. Malik told her to turn her phone off. Noise isn't news, he said, and truth doesn't ask permission. But she knew something had to change. Something had to be said. So she made a choice, a bold one. She called in a favor from an old friend at the Denver Civic Convention Center, where she'd once spoken about brand identity and consumer behavior to a standing ovation. This time, she wasn't selling a product. She was standing for something, and she wouldn't be doing it alone. She turned to Malik one evening as they packed up tools. There's something I need to say publicly, and I want you there when I do. He looked hesitant. What if I don't belong in that room? Then we'll change the room, she said. But I'm not saying anything unless you're in the audience. I want them to see who this is really for. He paused, then nodded. I'll be there. And just like that, the next chapter began. Not with fanfare, not with comfort, but with two people who finally understood that real foundations aren't laid with cement, but with courage. The Denver Civic Convention Center loomed like a glass fortress against the late spring sky, its sleek panels reflecting the afternoon sun in sharp flashes that seemed to dare anyone to walk in without purpose. Inside, the air buzzed with the kind of tension that money brings investors in the tailored suits, checking their watches, startup founders murmuring elevator pitches to themselves, media crews adjusting camera angles and mic levels, while backstage assistants whispered names like spells into headsets. On the scrolling LED screen that arched over the stage in digital blue, the schedule blinked with polite efficiency. 3:30 p.m. Arielle Monroe, founder of the Framework Project Community Design in the Age of Innovation. It was the kind of title you gave when you didn't want to scare people with the word truth. Arielle stood in the wing's heart, hammering against the matte black blazer she'd chosen, simple, sharp, grounded. It wasn't meant to impress. It was armor. Her palms were damp despite her stillness. And next to her, her assistant fidgeted like a wind-up toy running out of turns. You don't have to do this, she said for the third time. You could pivot, rebrand, you could... I have to, Arielle replied, voice steady but quiet. They need to see it. All of it. On the other side of the room, Malik sat in the back row. He wore the same blazer from the Carrington event, not because he wanted to blend in, but because Arielle had asked, and because he'd told himself if she was brave enough to stand under the lights, he could be brave enough to watch. His boots were still worn mismatched to the slick floors and polished shoes around him, but he didn't care. He wasn't there for them. He was there for her. The announcer's voice echoed through the space with rehearsed clarity. Please welcome Arielle Monroe, founder of Elevate Creative and co-founder of the Framework Project. The applause was polite expected, nothing more. Arielle stepped into the light. The stage washed her in white, blinding at first, but she didn't blink. She didn't need to see them. She needed them to hear her. She reached the podium, looked down at the notes she had written and rewritten until they felt meaningless, and then set them aside. I'm not here to talk about market projections, she began, voice clear, or IPOs, or acquisition strategies. A murmur flickered through the crowd. Confusion, discomfort. She let it settle. I'm here to talk about what happens when we forget that innovation starts with people, not platforms, not pipelines. People. She paused. Behind her, the screen changed, not to charts or graphs or logos, but to a single photo, a workbench, A pair of calloused hands guiding a child's grip on a hammer. Dust in the air, light catching on sweat and patience. A moment captured not for profit but for purpose. What you don't know, she continued, is that I left my previous company not because I failed, but because I succeeded in a way they couldn't monetize. I brought someone to a networking event, a builder, a teacher, a man who didn't wear a suit, but who carried more integrity than most of the boardrooms I've ever sat in. Her throat tightened, but she pushed through. His name is Malik Johnson, and I love him. The room froze. A silence so sharp it could have broken glass settled like frost. And then the phones came out. Clicks, flashes, gasps. But Arielle didn't flinch. If that costs me your respect, you're funding your speaking slots, so be it. Because I'd rather build something honest with him than pretend another day with you. She stepped away from the podium, heart pounding like a drum against her chest. But her spine didn't waver. She walked off stage without waiting for applause. She wasn't expecting any. Backstage, her assistant looked pale. Sienna, the press, is already calling. I mean, what are you going to tell them? Arielle unpinned the mic from her lapel. Let them write, she said calmly. I gave them something worth writing about. As the stage lights dimmed behind her, she moved down the hallway toward the exit. But before she reached the door, she stopped. Because Malik was standing there. He had made his way around dodging stares and whispers, his face unreadable, but his presence solid. You didn't have to do that, he said softly. I know what you could lose. She walked toward him without hesitation. Then, let me lose it with intention. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The hallway seemed to still the noise fading into the hum of fluorescent lights. Malik looked at her like he hadn't dared to until now. You meant it, every word she said. He nodded just once. Then I'm staying. Her eyes glistened. Good. That night, the internet caught fire. The headlines were molten with implication. Arielle Monroe declares love for construction worker in shocking tech summit speech. From CEO to community builder, is Arielle Monroe losing her mind or gaining her soul? The backlash came first, swift and cold. One by one, investors distanced themselves. Emails arrived with subject lines like termination of interest and professional reassessment. People she'd once mentored ghosted her calls. Brands scrubbed her name from their newsletters. But something else happened too. A quiet wave. A flood, really. Not from executives, but from everywhere else. Letters, emails, notes. From teachers in Cleveland, from veterans in El Paso, from single moms in Baltimore, from a grandmother in Oklahoma who wrote, "You reminded me what it feels like to be seen." But the one that hit hardest came in the form of a pink envelope with childish handwriting, postmarked from Detroit. Inside was a note that read, My brother says, I can't build things because I'm a girl, but you showed them. You built something brave. Arielle read it aloud to Malik on the porch of their still unfinished workshop as dusk fell around them like a blanket. He leaned back in the old chair they'd salvaged from the alley behind the thrift store, arms crossed behind his head, staring at the stars beginning to shimmer through the navy sky. She gets it, he said. Arielle looked at him, a soft smile on her lips. Yeah, she does. He turned to her, his voice quieter now. You know, you didn't just break their silence today. What do you mean you broke mine? And neither of them needed to speak after that. They just sat together on the edge of something bigger than either had imagined when they first met on a sunburned highway, and listened to the sound of possibility taking root beneath them. 1 year later, the sun rose gently over Flagstaff, casting long golden rays across the gravel lot, where a forgotten warehouse had once stood silent and lifeless, but now pulsed with quiet energy and fresh breath. Where there had once been rot and broken glass, now stood a sleek, purposeful structure, clean-lined walls of reclaimed pine wood and corrugated steel, tall windows etched with bold lettering that read Johnson and Monroe Institute, Skills, Dignity, Future. Inside, the air carried the scent of sawdust, fresh paint, and cinnamon rolls from the bakery down the street that donated every Friday morning. The workshop buzzed with life, not corporate life, not manufactured excitement, but the real kind, the kind that lives in laughter and mistakes and learning curves. Young men and women of all shades and stories. Black, white, Latino, Navajo lined long tables. Heads bent over wood planks, camera rigs, soldering kits. At the center of it all, Malik stood in jeans and a deep blue shirt apron, dusted in chalk hands, steady as he guided a student through a dovetail joint. His voice calm, exact, but never condescending. There was no stage here, no spotlight, but everyone in the room looked at him with something close to reverence. Because here, he wasn't a guest. He wasn't a charity case. He was home. Arielle stood by the glass entrance, greeting donors and city leaders, some old friends, some new believers. She looked different, not just in wardrobe or posture, but in presence, grounded, sharp. Her hair was pulled back, simply a few strands loose in the wind, as she pointed out different stations inside the media. Editing booth, the artisan leather studio, the corner labeled Mentorship Lab. Her phone buzzed endlessly in her purse calls from national news outlets conference, invites a message from her old assistant with a line of exclamation points, but she didn't check any of them. Not today. Outside rows of folding chairs, filled with guests from across the state, began to settle as two American flags flanked a small podium framed by saplings they had planted in spring. Malik stepped up to the mic, hands gripping both sides, eyes scanning a sea of faces. Some familiar, many not, but he didn't waver. I used to believe that some people were just born to stay small. He began, voice low but resonant, that no matter how good you were, how hard you worked, there were rooms you'd never be invited into. He paused, glanced at Arielle standing in the wings, and continued. And then I met someone who didn't invite me in. She walked out of the room herself, sat beside me, and listened. She didn't hand me a ladder, she handed me tools. And together, we built something bigger than either of us. The crowd leaned in. Arielle blinked hard. He nodded toward the building behind him. This place isn't just for kids who want to learn how to build a table. It's for the ones who were told they couldn't. For the ones who fixed everything except the way the world sees them. For the ones who don't wear suits but wear scars. Who know what calloused hands feel like and how to use them with care. He looked at the students behind the crowd, those who had helped sand every beam, who had painted their own stories into the murals on the wall, and then said, "It's for the ones like me." Applause erupted, not polite, not forced, but full and rising like water. He waited, let it breathe, then leaned into the mic one last time. We named it Johnson and Monroe, but this place doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the future. Later that afternoon, when the speeches had ended and the guests had wandered off to tour the building, Malik and Arielle sat side by side on the back steps, watching three kids chase each other across the field they'd cleared months ago, with nothing but rake sweat and loud music from a borrowed speaker. Arielle leaned her head against his shoulder, her breath slow, her body finally still. "You nailed it," she said softly. He chuckled low in his chest. I didn't stutter. "Nope," she smiled. "You just turned every grown man out there into a puddle." He laughed, but there was something deeper in the sound now, something healed. "Do you ever miss it?" he asked. "The old world." She shook her head without hesitation. "Not for a second. I didn't lose power. I just found a better way to use it." He turned to her, his voice tender but curious. "You remember what you said to me after the conference, which part, that loving something real was worth losing everything else." She looked at him, and he held up her hand, kissed her knuckles with a reverence that required no performance. "You were right." And there, as the workshop behind them glowed with the sound of tools and dreams, they sat with their hands entwined and eyes fixed on a sky that had never looked more open, more possible, or more honest. Evenings came slower now, not because the sun lingered longer, but because time moved differently in places built with intention. At the Johnson and Monroe Institute, dusk brought with it the sounds of closure, not silence, but the soft click of light switches, the metallic shush of rolling tool chests, the echo of one last laugh bouncing off the walls before doors were locked. Malik stayed late most nights, not because he had to, but because he needed the solitude after hours to think, to breathe, to plan. On one particular evening, as the sky faded from gold to navy, he stood alone in the main workshop, organizing clamps and measuring tape when the bell above the front door chimed. Arielle entered with wind in her hair and a small frame tucked under her arm. She walked without speaking, a kind of quiet in her steps that told him this wasn't a business visit. Malik watched as she approached, her eyes fixed not on him, but on the object in her hands. "I brought something," she said, setting the frame gently on the central work table. He stepped closer. Inside the frame was a photo, black and white, candid raw. It showed Malik viewed from behind guiding a group of teenagers as they huddled over a plank of wood. His posture was focused, his hand midair, explaining something the students watching him with total attention. Above the photo etched in clean script were the words "Love Builds." He didn't say anything at first. His eyes lingered on the photo, then flicked to her. "Where do we hang it?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "At the heart." The next morning, the two of them mounted the frame on the wall near the entrance just before the first student would clock in, just after the last doubt would turn into purpose. And then they returned to work, not for applause, but because it was Tuesday. And on Tuesdays they taught router skills and digital storytelling. The Institute had become more than they expected. It wasn't just a space for youth anymore. Veterans had started attending weekend workshops. Mothers brought their kids into shadow classes. One local pastor used the space after hours to teach conflict resolution. And every Friday night under string lights and a borrowed projector, the community gathered for free outdoor movie screenings on the side of the building, seated on fold-out chairs and patches of worn blankets. They didn't talk about politics. They didn't talk about division. They just sat together. They laughed. They healed. But not everyone welcomed the change. One afternoon, a well-dressed man arrived unannounced. He wore cufflinks shaped like dollar signs and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He asked for Arielle by name and introduced himself as a strategic investor with deep industry relationships. Malik watched from across the room, arms folded. The man gestured too much, talked too fast. "This thing you've built here, impressive. Really, and it's scalable. That's the beauty of it. Imagine franchises, East Coast, international. We could take this global in 18 months. Arielle didn't answer immediately. She stood in the middle of the workshop, surrounded by sawdust and handwritten quotes on the walls, and looked at Malik. Then she turned back to the man. "We didn't build this to scale," she said. "We built it to last." The man's smile faltered. "You're making an emotional decision." "Exactly," she said. "Because this place was born from something real, and I'm not selling it to the same system that made me forget what that feels like." She thanked him politely. He left less politely. Malik raised an eyebrow as the door shut behind him. "That guy probably hasn't used a screwdriver in his life." She laughed. "He probably thinks drill press is a PR tactic." Later that night, they sat on the rooftop of the building legs, dangling over the edge, watching the town below, blink to sleep one window at a time. "You still think about the old life?" Malik asked. She was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. The control, the certainty. The clean inbox." He smiled sideways. "You miss clean inboxes?" "No," she admitted. "I miss pretending I was safe." Malik nodded slowly, understanding in the way only someone who had once lived in fear of being noticed could. "You're not pretending anymore." "No," she said. "I'm finally risking something that matters." He leaned back on his palms, eyes on the stars. "You know what's crazy? What we built this entire place because of a flat tire?" She laughed softly. "No, we built it because you stopped to help, stopped to see me, and because you didn't ask for anything in return." He turned to look at her, the kind of look that doesn't pass between strangers or even lovers, but between partners, between people who have chosen to stand in the fire for something bigger than themselves. "I guess sometimes the smallest moment is the start of the biggest thing," he said. She nodded. "And sometimes the real journey doesn't begin until you lose everything you thought you needed." He let that sit in the air for a while, then added, "It's funny, though. We built this whole space so others could belong, but I think somewhere along the way, we finally found a place for ourselves, too. They didn't kiss. They didn't have to. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about romance. It was about resilience. About choosing over and over again to show up, to hold the line, to build something worth bleeding for." And as they sat together, high above a town that once forgot how to see its own promise, the wind carried the sound of distant laughter from the field below. Not loud, not dramatic, just human. And that was enough. The seasons began to shift around them, almost shyly at first, as if afraid to disturb what they were building. The desert winds softened leaves along the river near the edge of town, turned gold and ember. And with each passing week, the Johnson and Monroe Institute took on a life of its own. No longer just a vision or a rebellion, but a breathing ecosystem of second chances. People who had once walked past the crumbling warehouse without a second glance now came every morning with purpose in their eyes and dirt beneath their fingernails. Malik and Arielle weren't just founders anymore. They were anchors, mentors, witnesses to quiet revolutions. Arielle began leading a weekly media storytelling workshop on Wednesdays, teaching young people how to use their voice not just on camera, but in their own lives. Malik added advanced carpentry apprenticeships on the weekends, where teens who once had nothing but suspension, notices in their backpacks now carved out intricate furniture with patience and pride. One boy, 13 years old and nearly mute from trauma, built a table over the course of 4 weeks and cried when he saw his name burned into the wood. "No one's ever kept something I made before," he whispered. Malik didn't say much. He just placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and squeezed once. That was enough. But even amid the steady pulse of progress, there were tremors. One afternoon, as Arielle was preparing for a visit from a non-profit press delegation, she received a letter slid under her office door. No return address, just 2 lines scribbled in pencil. "You can polish the wood all you want, but the rot stays underneath." It shook her more than she wanted to admit. She didn't show it to Malik immediately. Instead, she buried herself deeper in the work of double-checking grant reports and training schedules, forcing herself to smile when the community leaders arrived with cameras and clipboards. But Malik noticed anyway. He always did. That night after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed low, he found her in the storage room, organizing bolts by size, even though they were already perfectly arranged. "Whoever said that thing to you," he began, leaning against the doorframe. "They don't know what we've built." She didn't look at him right away. "They're not wrong, though. There's still rot out there, still people who see me as a joke, who see you as disposable." Malik stepped forward, slow and steady. "Yeah, but rot doesn't survive when something living grows over it." She looked up. "What if it spreads?" He met her eyes. "Then we build stronger." A long silence passed between them, heavy, not hopeless. Then she reached into the box beside her and pulled out a small, freshly sanded sign. It read, "No one here is broken. We are all under construction. It's for the front wall," she said. Malik took it, gently ran his hand over the words. "It's perfect." A week later, it was mounted at the entrance just above the coat hooks and next to the growing photo wall of student projects, community events, and spontaneous joy. Visitors often paused at the sign before stepping in. Some smiled, some cried, and some just stood there reading it twice before continuing, as if needing the reminder to land. But it wasn't just words. It became a belief, a rhythm, and it rippled out into every nail-driven, every camera lens, adjusted every apology spoken and accepted between people who once thought redemption wasn't meant for them. That winter, a local news station came to film a segment on the Institute. The piece aired during prime time and caught unexpected national attention. Suddenly, emails poured in from places neither Malik nor Arielle had ever been: Milwaukee, Memphis, San Diego, a remote town in Alaska. People wanted to know how to start their own versions. They wanted blueprints, curriculum, guidance. Arielle and Malik sat together one evening, reviewing the flood of inquiries under a single heat lamp near the back entrance, coffee growing cold between them. "What do we tell them?" she asked. Malik didn't answer at first. He stared out into the dusk, where a student named Layla was helping her younger brother repaint a broken bike they'd found in a junkyard. "We tell them the truth," he said finally, "that it starts with something small, a flat tire, a missed turn, a reason to stop and look around. And then we tell them, don't build an institution. Build a space where people can remember they matter." Arielle smiled, slow and tired and grateful. "And if they ask how we kept it alive," Malik looked at her, eyes steady, "we tell them we kept showing up, even when it was hard, especially then." She reached out, brushing sawdust from his sleeve. "You really believe in this, don't you?" "No," he said. "I believe in us." She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Because in that moment, beneath the hum of faraway traffic and the whisper of possibility circling above them, like wind over new soil, she realized something quietly profound. They hadn't just built a place. They'd built a promise. And somehow, despite everything they'd lost, that promise had made them whole. Spring arrived, not with fanfare, but with a softness that settled over the town like forgiveness. Wildflowers pushed through dry soil along the highway, The riverbank swelled gently from melted snow. Up north, and within the walls of the Johnson and Monroe Institute, the hum of machines blended with birdsong that filtered through the open windows. The building had become a kind of sanctuary now, not just for the students who came in to learn, but for the stories they carried with them, for the parents who lingered longer at drop-off, just to feel the calm in the walls, for the people who once walked with shoulders hunched from judgment and now stood a little taller, tools in hand, eyes lit with new direction. But with growth came pressure, the kind that doesn't announce itself like a storm, but seeps into the floorboards of your peace. One afternoon, Arielle received an invitation she hadn't expected: the Summit for American Social Investment, a high-profile event hosted in D.C., where philanthropic leaders and elite donors gathered to showcase transformative initiatives across the country. It was the kind of stage she used to own, the kind she had walked away from deliberately. But the request came with a twist. They wanted her to bring Malik. "They want us both," she asked the rep on the phone, her voice edged with suspicion. "Of course," the woman said cheerfully. "The media loves a good redemption arc. He's the heart, you're the brains. It's perfect." Arielle hung up without committing. That evening, she found Malik in the back courtyard, sanding a bench with two students, both girls, both 17, both newly enrolled, after dropping out of traditional high school. One of them looked up and called to her, "Miss Monroe, Malik says you can't build a bench without sanding your pride first." That true Arielle smiled, but her heart was elsewhere. After the girls left, she sat beside Malik on the edge of the garden bed they had planted last fall, hands in her lap, words slow and measured. "They want us to speak at a summit in D.C. next month. They called you the heart, called me the brains." Malik didn't respond at first. He stared at the horizon, then shrugged. "Is that what we are now? A headline? It's a chance," she said, "to amplify what we're doing, to find new allies, maybe even funding. And what would it cost? Maybe nothing," she said, "maybe just being seen." He turned to her, then expression unreadable. "You remember what it felt like the last time we stood in a room like that?" She did. She remembered the terrace, the stairs, the silence, the way he walked away. But this felt different now. They were different. "We won't go for them," she said. "We'll go for everyone who's never been invited into those rooms. And we'll walk out together if it stops feeling honest." Malik studied her face, then gave a small nod. "Then we do it our way." And so they went. The flight to D.C. was quiet but not tense. Malik watched the clouds like he was memorizing them. Arielle read a community letter from a mother in El Paso who said her son had joined a wood shop because of the stories coming from Flagstaff. When they arrived at the conference, the contrast was immediate. Glass chandeliers, red carpet runners, smiling faces that practiced empathy like posture. The event director greeted them with curated warmth, escorting them backstage, where monitors displayed live feeds of every panel, every polished speech. "You'll go on after the tech panel," she said. "Try to keep it on message. We love passion, but clean sound bites. Okay?" Arielle looked at Malik. He raised an eyebrow. "Clean sound bites," he whispered. "She means, don't scare the money." They both chuckled quietly. Then, as the clock struck their time, they stepped onto the stage, not in matching suits or curated branding, but in exactly who they were. Arielle wore her usual dark jeans and blazer. Malik wore a clean blue button-down, sleeves rolled. The room filled with polite interest. Fingers hovered over record buttons. Arielle started first. She spoke of purpose, of the moment she met a young man on a desert road with nothing to gain and everything to give. She spoke of a notebook, of an idea, of the day they decided to build, not for profit, but for permanence. Malik followed. He didn't use notes. He didn't need them. He spoke about broken systems and overlooked skills. He spoke about being told to aim lower his whole life, and how one person chose instead to kneel beside him and build upward. "This place we made," he said, voice low but unwavering, "isn't about charity. It's about dignity. And if that makes you uncomfortable, good. Because maybe it should." There was a long pause when they finished. No one clapped right away. But then someone stood. Then another. Until the room rose in slow, reluctant reverence, not because of spectacle, but because truth, when spoken clearly, is hard to ignore. Backstage, the director rushed to them. "That was powerful," she said tightly. "But just so you know, some of the donors were surprised." "Let them be," Arielle said. "They were warned." Malik smiled. "We don't do clean sound bites." That night, they walked through the streets of DC without maps or plans, just a shared silence between them that felt more like understanding than absence. They found a diner, split a plate of fries, laughed over a broken ketchup bottle, and talked about everything but the future. Because for once, the present was enough. When they flew home the next day, they landed not as visitors from a world of polished stages, but as builders returning to something real. And as the Institute came back into view, its simple structure, its beating heart, they knew with absolute certainty they hadn't just survived the spotlight, they had claimed it, on their terms. Together. The day they returned from D.C. The wind in Flagstaff carried a different weight, cooler, steadier, threaded with the kind of stillness that follows a storm, not of weather, but of truth. The moment Arielle and Malik stepped off the shuttle and back into the dust and cracked sidewalks of the town they now called home, they felt it a shift subtle but real. Not everyone had watched the summit speech, but enough had. Enough to fill their inboxes with messages from social workers, parole officers, foster care advocates, retired teachers, all saying the same thing in different ways. Thank you for saying what we couldn't. The Institute was buzzing by the time they arrived. Students rushed to help unpack. Volunteers asked questions one of the new apprentices had accidentally drilled through a laptop desk, and Malik laughed so hard he nearly dropped his tool belt. Arielle walked through the space like someone seeing it for the first time. Again, walls lined with blueprints, whiteboards scrawled with upcoming class ideas, photo walls now covered with over 40 portraits, each labeled with a name and a date they first stepped inside. But what struck her most was the energy, this unspoken rhythm, this ecosystem of self-worth. It didn't need her approval to breathe anymore. It was alive on its own. That afternoon, Malik stood in the corner of the woodshop with 3 students teaching them how to measure flush joints. One of the girls, Layla, was now confident enough to correct him when he missed a step, and instead of feeling challenged, he beamed. "Now you're paying attention," he said, bumping her fist. Arielle watched the moment quietly from the hallway, heart caught between awe and peace. She thought back to the girl she had been when she met him, a woman in a luxury car with a flat tire and too many walls built around her soul. That version of her would have never survived here. But this version, boots, dusty hands, ink-stained eyes, unguarded, this version didn't just survive. She bloomed. That evening, as the sky blushed into deep apricot, Arielle prepared a quiet dinner for the staff, just a few folding tables pushed together under string lights. Simple food, laughter, mismatched plates. Malik arrived late arms. Full of scrap wood he refused to let go of until he'd stored them properly. Waste nothing, he always said. When he sat beside her, she nudged a plate in his direction. "You've eaten right now, I have," he said, tearing into a roll. There was a contented pause. Around them, the others joked about which student would burn the next batch of toast in the media kitchen, or who was sneaking extra cookies from the break room jar. Arielle leaned her head against Malik's shoulder. "You know what day it is?" she asked. "Wednesday. Exactly 1 year since we first opened." He blinked. "No way." "Way," she said, smiling. "You gave that first lesson about miter cuts to a group of boys who didn't even know what a tape measure was." He laughed. "And now they're better than me." "Careful," she teased. "They'll replace you." "They already have," he said, and the pride in his voice was louder than the words. The group lingered long after the sun dipped low. Someone brought out an old guitar. A girl named Jasmine read a spoken word poem she'd written about her first time walking into a place that didn't see her as a problem to solve. Tears shimmered in Arielle's eyes, but she didn't hide them. She let them fall soft and proud. As the night wound down, Malik walked her back to her truck, the gravel crunching beneath them, their shadows stretched long under the amber lights. "I was thinking," he said, "about the kids writing to us, the ones asking how to start their own spaces." "Me too," she replied. "It's time, isn't it?" "It is." "So, we replicate the model?" she asked. "Not exactly," he said. "We plant seeds, help them build it their way. Let each space grow out of the dirt it comes from, just like this one." She nodded slowly. "We'll need a new team." "We'll train them," he said. "Together." He paused, then looked at her with something deeper than hope. "And if you're still building this life, I'm still building it with you." Her breath caught not from surprise, but from the quiet joy of knowing she no longer had to carry anything alone. Always she whispered, "You're the only blueprint I didn't expect, but the only one that made sense." They stood there in the cool desert night, beneath a sky full of stars and the soft echo of laughter still floating in the air. And for the first time in their long, beautiful story of reinvention, neither of them needed to say thank you, or I'm sorry, or what if, because every word, every nail, every silent moment between them had already said it all. Autumn came again, but this time it did not arrive with uncertainty. It came with clarity, with a golden certainty that some seasons aren't meant to test you, but to remind you what you've grown. The trees lining the road outside the Johnson and Monroe Institute blazed in fire orange and deep rust, their leaves drifting gently to the earth like blessings. Inside the building, a new cohort of students gathered in the entry hall, wide-eyed and half-nervous, as they read the sign that now hung above the front door in a frame of reclaimed wood. No one here is broken. We are all under construction. Malik stood beside the welcome table, nodding as a boy handed in his intake form and stared in awe at the photo wall behind him. "That one's me," Malik said, pointing to the first photo ever taken. Him sleeves rolled up, teaching a class of 4 on how to level a frame. That photo built this place more than any hammer ever did. Meanwhile, in the far corner office, Arielle finished a call with a school superintendent in Minnesota who was asking for help designing a version of the Institute for students aging out of the foster care system. She promised they'd send the toolkit draft by Friday. Behind her, stacked neatly in boxes, were bound starter kits labeled Framework in a Box, version 1.0, each filled with blueprints, mentorship structures, workshop curriculum, and most importantly, a page titled Start with Listening. Their model wasn't being sold, it was being shared, licensed for free, built to spread dignity, not franchises. As the week unfolded, preparations intensified for something that still didn't feel real, the official one-year celebration of the Institute. But this wasn't going to be a press event or a gala. It was going to be something else, something real. The invitations were handwritten. The food was made by the students in the culinary tech lab. And on the evening of the celebration, the sky turned soft with lavender light as hundreds gathered on the lot. Community members, graduates, neighbors, people who had once driven past without stopping, but now called the place part of their lives. There were no red carpets, just a long table covered in canvas where kids painted thank you cards while their parents stood in line for chili and cornbread. In the center of it all stood a stage, not raised, not spotlighted, just a simple wooden platform Malik and 3 students had built the weekend before. Arielle stepped onto it, microphone in hand, Malik standing just behind her. She scanned the crowd, then smiled with the weight and grace of a woman who had once been exiled from boardrooms and now ruled something better, something honest. 1 year ago, she began. We opened the doors to a place we didn't even know how to explain. All we knew was that people deserved more than survival. They deserved space. They deserved belief. And they deserved to be seen, not for what they lacked, but for what they carried quietly waiting for someone to notice. Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. And then you showed up. You painted the walls. You built the shelves. You stayed. So this isn't our anniversary. This is yours. And we thank you for letting us walk beside you. She stepped back, letting Malik take the mic. He said less, but somehow more. Arielle once told me, he said voice steady, that loving something real was worth losing everything else. And I didn't understand that at the time. Because I didn't know what real love was. Not romantic, not community, not self-love. But now I do. And it's this. All of you. This place. The version of me I didn't think could exist. So, thank you. For building it with us. The crowd clapped not loud, but long. Like they were afraid to let go of the moment. And as the sun dipped below the hill and the lights flickered on across the lawn, a hush fell across the gathering. As Arielle and Malik stepped off the stage and walked through the crowd, not as leaders above them, but as one of them. They stopped at the photo wall. A new frame had been added that day. A candid shot taken just last week of Malik kneeling beside a student, helping him brace a workbench, and Arielle standing behind them, watching with quiet pride, hand resting over her heart. Below the image in looping cursive were just 2 words, "Love builds." Later that night, after the last guest had gone, the lanterns had been packed up, and the field had returned to its stillness. Malik and Arielle sat on the edge of the loading dock, behind the building, their legs dangling over the side, their shoulders touching. No words. Just the hum of their breath, the quiet crackle of a distant fire pit, and the knowledge that they had done something the world once told them was impossible. "So," Malik said at last, glancing sideways. "What now?" Arielle smiled. "Now we keep building, even if it gets hard, especially then." He took her hand, laced their fingers together. "You ready?" She turned her face to him, eyes soft and certain. "With you, always." And as they sat beneath a sky dotted with stars, backs to a building made of nails and second chances and hearts full of purpose they hadn't known they were missing, the world kept spinning quietly around them, and for once it felt exactly right. Because what they had created wasn't just a program or a place, it was a promise. And it was only the beginning. They didn't set out to change the world. They just refused to keep living in one that forgot how to care. From a dusty roadside to a workshop full of hope, Malik and Arielle didn't just fall in love. They rebuilt the very idea of what it means to believe in someone. Together, they proved that dignity is not a privilege, but a foundation. That kindness is not weakness, but strength in its truest form. And that love, real love, isn't about saving each other. It's about building something that saves others. So, if you ever doubt what one moment, one choice, one voice can do, remember them. And remember, sometimes the strongest walls are built not with bricks, but with broken pieces held together by purpose. If this story moved you, share it. Let someone out there be reminded they are not broken. They're just under construction.